people who follow this every single day, I don't think they're aware of this kind of change in thinking of ETH2. So yeah, can you kind of explain how that shift happened?
Sure. So I think it's important to remember that the ETH2 roadmap has something that has changed quite a bit over the last few years. So I think the vision around 3 to 4 years ago actually was to just make a new chain that would change a lot of things, that would fix all of the mistakes in the existing Ethereum system, and then add proof of stake, add sharding, and finally come up with some kind of way for existing applications to move over. And I think the roadmap has evolved to become more pragmatic over time in a lot of ways. So especially as the merge has come closer, there have been a lot of these subtle changes toward emphasizing just making it a very smooth transition for developers. So just like as one example, right, like in the roadmap as it was in 2018, like it would have probably required individual application developers or just individual users to take their assets and move it over from the ETH1 chain to the ETH2 chain. But now, like, there isn't even moving from chain to chain happening, right? Like the two chains are even merging together. And the thing that we call the ETH1 chain today, like that's being renamed the execution chain, right? And the thing called the beacon chain, it's being renamed the consensus chain. And these are not going to be two separate chains, right? Right now, there's two separate chains, but after the merge, the execution chain is going to live inside of the consensus chain, right? So every beacon chain block will contain one execution chain block. So, you'll literally have a chain inside a chain. And the reason why we did this is to just make the merge process as simple as possible and as smooth as possible for users, for client developers, and for contract and application developers, right? Because your experience of Ethereum as a user is not even going to change all that much between before the merge and after the merge. Like you download the software and your experience just interacting with the Ethereum chain looks very similar before and after. The only difference is that before, the Ethereum execution blocks had some proof of work attached, and after, these Ethereum execution blocks will not have any proof of work attached anymore, but instead they'll come packaged inside these beacon chain blocks. So there's a lot of complicated technical wizardry happening in the background, but from the point of view as a user, you don't even have to worry about that as much, right? And so there's a lot of continuity between Ethereum before and Ethereum after. It's not a replacement. It's actually a fairly slow and incremental kind of upgrade where basically the entire ecosystem is being sort of taken from running on top of this older proof of work design to running on top of this and newer and very powerful proof of stake design. And then with the ability to add sharding and other lovely things on top. So, basically, like post-merge Ethereum is Ethereum, right? Like there isn't this sort of you have 1.0 ETH and 2.0 ETH. There isn't this kind of you have a 1.0 ecosystem and a 2.0 ecosystem. It just is the Ethereum ecosystem and always will be the Ethereum ecosystem.
I mean, from the point of view of a user, I'm phew, that sounds so much simpler to not have to transfer assets, to not have to worry about two different ETHs. And will this new proof of stake chain hold the transaction history of the old proof of work chain?
So that's the one thing that it will not, right? So basically transaction history before the merge, it will still be in this proof of work chain. And at some point, Ethereum clients are just going to kind of delete the old code and they're not going to speak the old language anymore. And people are going to have to kind of either use old nodes or create special purpose protocols to handle really old data. So that I think that's just a kind of necessary technical decision, right? Because we are trading off a couple of different factors, right? On the one hand, we definitely do not want Ethereum nodes to just continue becoming more unwieldy and more complex to build and run over time, right? And so if you don't want that, then the only way to do that is to forget old things, right? to forget like older transactions, older protocol rules, and like have the newer versions of the software focus on just being able to process the chain as it is today and say as it was in the last like say year or two. But if you still want to go in and look at things that happened before, like you will be able to, right? And there's already third-party protocols, like for example, the graph is one thing that people are starting to use to look up history more efficiently. So there are going to be a lot of ways to do that if you still just need to access history for whatever reason. But it's just sort of being taken out of the scope of like the things that a node has to do in order to be an Ethereum node that's part of the network.
That's really interesting. I wonder if there's kind of I don't know, like analysis there to be made on just the immutability aspect of Ethereum. The fact that now, sure, like you have like all the previous transaction history somewhere else, but because it's not part of the like the chain at the moment, I mean, can one argument be made that, oh, like Ethereum isn't as immutable because that was erased?
I don't think it would compromise immutability, right? Because like the hash chain is still there, right? If you want to go audit it, like you can still check that, every block had a hash of the previous block, and then you look up the previous block, and then that block has a hash of its own previous block, and you keep looking it up. Like there's no way whatsoever that an attacker would be able to like give you fake old blocks and convince you that they're real old blocks, because like for every one of these old blocks, if they're real, you would be able to come up with a proof, and if they're fake, like there's no way the attacker can make a proof. It is definitely like there is, I think, a real kind of cultural difference in expectations versus like something like Bitcoin, for example, right? Like where in the case of like the Bitcoin ecosystem, they really value this idea that you with a present day Bitcoin node can just go and validate every single thing that happened from day one. And in the case of Ethereum, like that's not really true, right? And if you actually want to go personally check that everything is fine, then like at some point you would have to like, go back into history, use an older version of the Ethereum clients to check the older part of the chain, then use a newer version to check the newer part of the chain. And like that is definitely a somewhat different kind of relationship between the community and the chain. And like that's true in other ways as well, right? So like for example, with proof of stake, like we talk about weak subjectivity and how like one of the trade-offs of proof of stake is that to get the full security guarantees, you do like there is some kind of like minimum frequency, like you have to kind of log on at least once every certain number of weeks or months. And that's also something that proof of work does not have, right? So like there's definitely trade-offs being made. I mean, obviously the fact that we're doing this means that we think that the benefits are much higher than the costs, but the trade-offs do exist as well, and that's fine.